Welcome to the RotoDen NBA Post-Draft Podcast. I'm Blaine Robinson, an editor at RotoDen, along with John Ryan, also an editor and our in-house draft expert. John, how you doing this morning?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Not too bad. What's your lasting impression from the draft last night? What sort of sticks out in your mind about everything that we saw happen last night, whether it be the trades, the draft picks? What's sort of your lasting impression?
I think the main takeaway has to be the Timberwolves trade acquiring Jimmy Butler for a pretty good price. Not only do they get Jimmy Butler, an all-star player, but they also get Justin Patton at great value with the Bulls pick at 16, and they didn't have to give up all that much in retrospect.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think, oftentimes we get so hooked on looking at only the draft picks, but I say the really the big story from draft night was the Timberwolves, like you said. And it's clear that they are going for it. This past season was a year where they were supposed to really take that big step. So it's not like they're scrubs. It just didn't all come together for them. But now, if we expected them to take a leap last year, I think getting Jimmy Butler in the mix and, pairing him with his favorite coach, basically, and Thibodeau loves him, I think you can really expect, big things from Minnesota. What kind of year do you see them having next year?
Yeah, exactly what you were saying. And what they were saying on ESPN last night right after the trade, it's when they're talking about the 76ers, they're kind of honing in on how important veterans are and how it's great to have these young stars. Veterans kind of help make the leap for these young guys. So now getting Jimmy Butler and adding that with Wiggins and Towns, I think they could be fighting for a playoff spot as early as next year, especially with the Western Conference weakening towards the 8th seed. I know the Blazers snuck in there this year. So I believe it was a sub 500 record. So I think the Wolves could sneak right in there.
Yeah, I honestly expect the Wolves to be at minimum a 6th seed. It'll depend on how it all comes together, but you hit on it a second ago. You're able to retain Wiggins. They were in deep negotiations last year. Thibodeau really wanted to get Butler in a trade last offseason, and the Bulls were pretty dead set on acquiring Andrew Wiggins in any deal. The fact that they came off that and, I don't want to really call it settled because I thought the Bulls did decent in the trade, but to not have to give up Wiggins and you get Levine, Chris Dunn, and Lauri Markkanen via the 7th pick, I think the Timberwolves did a good job because it was clear to me, and we don't really know how close the fans pay attention to stuff like this, but it was clear to me that you couldn't have both Levine and Wiggins. I don't know your thoughts on this, but we've never really seen a team have 3 20-plus point per game scorers, and it just didn't give me the vibe that it was going to work. Because you got Towns, who's probably the number one option, and then you've got Wiggins, who's definitely 1A. But Levine was also averaging 20 points a game, so he's taken 18 to 20 shots that, if I'm the coach, I want Karl Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins taking.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's also going to be refreshing to see Levine kind of let loose and be able to be himself. Because being behind Towns and Wiggins, he was never really able to just truly freelance and grow into a scorer that he could become. I think Butler's going to really open the door for Wiggins to really reach his potential. A lot of people have been criticizing him as he didn't really live up to the hype that he came as being the number one pick. But I think with Butler, he's really going to allow him to be great defensively. He's not going to have to focus on scoring because that was never really his true game. So with Butler there now, he could really hone in defensively while become a really good off-ball scorer.
Yeah, that's a great point you make. You probably recall I have asked people in the chat rooms for our website, who they prefer in 5 years, Devin Booker or Andrew Wiggins, and 85 to 90% of the responses have been in Devin Booker's favor, and I'm just not. I love Devin Booker's game. I'm just not that low on Andrew Wiggins. I side with Wiggins. I think in 5 years, especially now with the Jimmy Butler acquisition, I think that the Andrew Wiggins is really going to come into his own. And really showcase his game, but like you said, not be pressured to be the man. You know, he could be the third option and be better than the other team's first option. You know, because Karl Anthony Towns and Jimmy Butler are clearly going to be the number one and the number two on this team now. But Andrew Wiggins is better right now than a lot of other teams' best players. And as you mentioned, he's only going to get better from here.
Yep. He's almost underrated at this point in his career.
Yeah, I completely agree. So yeah, I don't know if you had any other lasting impressions. I did want to say one thing that stuck out to me last night quickly was the fall of Melo Trimble. I mean, it's almost tragic that the guy lost tens of millions of dollars by staying in school. You know, we always look at these guys and say, "Oh, we wish they'd stay in school," and it's sort of like a stigma now in college with one and dones. But had he been a one and done, he was projected by nearly every draft site to be a lottery pick and probably go in the top 10. And last night he goes undrafted. Did you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, it is. It is unfortunate because I was rooting for him. He was a fun guy to watch at Maryland, and he did get picked up last night. He's gonna at least play for the summer league for the 76ers. So hopefully that's a good fit and he's able to have a long career. But it is interesting to see how staying in that situation can affect you in such a negative way, because he was definitely a first-round pick after his freshman year and only fell at some.
Yeah, no question about that. So yeah, that pretty much covers my first impressions. It was definitely the trade as you mentioned, and then just had a quick thought on Melo Trimble. What about a few winners for you? Who really stood out to you as really walking away from last night? You know, you already mentioned one being the Timberwolves, so you can move on from that. But who else do you think really did a good job last night?
I think the Mavericks came away with who could possibly be the best player from this class when it's all said and done. Obviously, Fultz, Ball, and guys like Josh Jackson have the potential to be great. But sitting at 9, Dennis Smith Jr. is a point guard who I've been really high on all year. He can do everything that the other top-tier point guards can do, and he has athleticism that just it puts his potential that's extremely high. And I think sitting at 9, you couldn't have asked for a better come away than Dennis Smith Jr. there. He should be great for the Mavericks, and I think that's one of the best picks of the night. Makes them a real winner.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. You know, you pointed out, and many other people have pointed out, that in any other year, he's very well a top 3 pick. So to get him at 9, you've got to feel pretty good about yourself if you're the Mavericks. Who else for you really stood out as having a good draft night?
So the Kings had a really good night. After they took Fox at 5, who is also a great point guard with the depth of it this year, there were some real steals with the point guards. But after getting him, I thought they were going to take Monk at 10 and pair that backcourt up. But instead they made a trade and they acquired 2 picks from the Blazers and ended up with Justin Jackson and Harry Giles. And that's a great value because they could have took Monk, but they already had healed. And instead they turned it into a national champion in Justin Jackson. And last year, if it was this time last year, we'd be saying maybe the top pick in this year's draft in Giles. So if he can get healthy and turn it around, who knows, they could have got 2 or 3 of the better players in this class.
I definitely agree with that. They were number 2 on my winners from last night. I had the Timberwolves as the biggest draft night winner. The Kings, for all the reasons you mentioned. I mean, it's kind of ironic. I was saying last night that the Kings and the Cleveland Browns in the NFL, 2 of the most horribly run franchises, actually both did well for themselves in this most recent draft. And it's almost shocking, quite frankly. But for all the reasons you said, I completely agree with the Kings. I mean, to get essentially Harry Giles, a top 3 pick when healthy, and Justin Jackson to sort of fill a small forward need that they probably need to fill because they lost Omri Caspi, who played small forward minutes from them last year. They lose Rudy Gay, who was their stalwart at small forward last year. They lose Matt Barnes, who was a small forward for them last year. So I think getting Justin Jackson and Harry Giles, essentially for Zach Collins, I think is great value. And as you mentioned, those two guys are sort of the secondary lead of the story because De'Aaron Fox is all they could have hoped for at number 5. You know, they knew that they were essentially going to get Josh Jackson or De'Aaron Fox, and I think they wanted Fox and they got him. So I definitely think they were a big winner last night. And my last winner actually is the Golden State Warriors.
I agree.
And they didn't have a pick coming in to the night, I don't believe, but they move up for $3.5 million in cash, reportedly, to get Jordan Bell from Oregon, who's just a complete animal on the defensive end and on the glass. And he fell a lot further into the middle of the second round than we had originally anticipated. I know in our RotoDen live mock draft, you had him going in the first round. A lot of people said that he could be a late first rounder. And for the Warriors not only to pick up him, but then sign immediately after the draft Chris Boucher to a 2-way contract, I thought they did really well for themselves considering the circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, if you can point out one flaw for the Warriors, it's their interior defense. And what do? They go and get a first-round talent, Jordan Bell, one of the premier shot blockers in the class, high-energy guy, good rebounder. They get him with a great value in the second round, just having to give up cash. And then they go sign his teammate, so the chemistry's there. And he's another high-energy guy, another great shot blocker. Up until the tournament, I had Boucher rated ahead of Bell. But then Bell obviously had a great tournament and showed what he could do without Chris. But, yeah, it was a great draft for them. They couldn't have asked for a better night, and they only got better.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think one other thing to point out, too, is so often we hear about, you know, guys don't really find their way in the league because they get into a bad situation or they don't have the right players around them or the right coaching staff. That's why I thought, you know, I just had a sort of a feeling, especially after you selected him in the mock draft, that Jordan Bell was going to end up with the Spurs because they know how to develop talent. They know how to put you in the right positions to succeed. You're not going to fail there. But Golden State's right there, right up there as well. I mean, I think if you talk about a team where you don't need to be able to score, your offensive game can be your weakness, which is the case for Jordan Bell. You know, they make out like bandits because he's going to come in, he's going to rebound, he's going to be a rim protector, he's going to provide solid defense, and he can finish at the rim on dump-off passes and whatnot, but you're never going to need him to do very much of anything on the offensive end.
And people forget this, but the Warriors are really who they are because of player development. And you can see that again last year with Patrick McGaw, who had a great rookie year. And he wasn't really expected to do much, but he showed a lot of promise, and he should come in and play a bigger role this year. And they just keep on developing guys into good to great NBA players at great values. And I think it could just continue after these two picks.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. But did you have any other winners? Those were my three. Definitely Minnesota won. I had, I'm blanking now, but I had the Kings at 2. Sorry, and then I had the Warriors at 3. Was that sort of your order as well? I know you mentioned Dallas was a big winner for you. So were you sort of looking at Dallas, Minnesota, and the Kings?
Yeah, those are my big 3. Timberwolves, obviously, up at the top of that list. And I also just had, of course, the big baller brand, because he and LeVar and Lonzo got what they wanted. And they get to keep promoting themselves in the big market of LA.
You know, I think that's great that you point that out because I didn't think of that. And, I would have to say LeVar Ball is probably the biggest winner from last night. And I'm sure everyone has caught by now that he dropped the link for the white, purple, and gold colorway that will ship February 10th of 2018 for All-Star Weekend. and just adds to his PR and marketing genius.
Promising a playoff next year for the Lakers.
And I think that might be a bit of a reach to expect them to make the playoffs last year. Of course, we don't know what they're going to do in free agency. We don't know the status of Paul George, but the Timberwolves, in the Western Conference, really improved, and I think the Denver Nuggets are going to make the playoffs next year. They missed out by 1 or 2 games behind Portland this year, but they had a solid draft as well. Looks like they may move Moutier. There's talks that they're trying to get Bledsoe in the mix there in Denver. But I think it's going to be a crowded Western Conference, so we'll have to see. Everything that LeVar Ball has said, whether you like it or not, has somehow miraculously come true, but we'll have to wait. We'll have to wait a good 9 months to see if his playoff prediction comes true.
For sure.
Now, what about losers? There's definitely some losers from last night. We gave a lot of praise out just now, but who did you think from last night didn't help themselves at all or lost the biggest?
Well, I'll start by saying I do like Frank. That's no Kimya. I think he'll be a good NBA player. He showed a lot of promise, and he's a defensive monster. He's a good NBA frame, and if he develops an offensive game, he will be a good player. But I have to put the Knicks in there just because Dennis Smith Jr. is on the board, and I do like him more than Frank. And I thought they could have done better than him at 8. I thought Frank was obviously the next best point guard, but I thought the promise and potential that Dennis Smith Jr. has is just higher than what you get at 8. And then also at 58, to close out the second round almost, they picked a guy really off the board. There was a lot of great value there. And it's not like they need to draft and stash, but they picked a draft and stash guy, a point guard out of Serbia. Not even going to try and pronounce his name, but there were some great players still on the board. Cam Oliver's one, Jonathan Motley's a second. And they could have just had a better value there too.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. It's all about value, and it's the same thing that we just talked about with the Warriors. They didn't even have a pick, but they saw Jordan Bell become such a value, such a steal, that they capitalized. And it sounds like the Bulls, according to your draft board, did not capitalize. Or excuse me, I don't know why I said the Bulls. The Knicks.
Yes.
Sorry about that. Oh, who else was a loser for you?
I just touched on him, but also Jonathan Motley. I had him in my top 40. He was projected a first-round pick for a while, if not in the first, early second. And I guess through the pre-draft process, reports came out last night that NBA teams, multiple, had flagged him with a knee injury that was concerning both short-term and long-term. So he ended up slipping out of the draft, and to this point, I do not believe he's been signed either. So that was surprising and an unfortunate fall for a very talented player in Motley.
Yeah, he definitely came on this past year at Baylor. I thought he would be drafted. You never know with these. They run you through the medical gauntlet when you're meeting with teams and going through the pre-draft process. So I don't doubt that. I don't doubt that there may be a red flag there, but it's definitely shocking because he had a great season and he's definitely a guy who might not ever be a stud on the offensive end, but just his defensive presence and his rebounding can make a difference for a lot of teams in the league.
Yeah, for sure. He has a lot of length. He could become a good to above average defensive center in this league. He also has sort of a mid-range game. Started to step out from 3 even at Baylor. He had a lot of NBA talent. I was surprised even towards the later part of the draft that no team took a flyer on him, even with injuries.
Yeah, and it looks like, just to confirm what you just said, it looks like he is still a free agent. He's not been picked up. Another guy who, coincidentally, as I'm looking here, was just reported that he will sign with the Grizzlies by Adrian Wojnarowski 2 minutes ago, is Kobe Simmons. I thought he really hurt himself last night. A very athletic kid, definitely has potential and upside, but never really put it all together at Arizona last year. I think another year of school really would have helped him, especially considering they're going to play deep into March, not to get on an aside or anything, but, you know, they return a lot of guys. Alonzo Trier's coming back. They got the number 2 player in the class, DeAndre Ayton. I think that if Kobe Simmons had stayed, he really had an opportunity to skyrocket his draft status and probably get into the first round with a good year if he showcased that he could put it all together.
Yeah, I completely agree. I did have him in the back half of the first round in my next year's mock that I was working on roughly a month ago, because I didn't think he would end up declaring or staying in the draft. When he did it, I wasn't high on the move. I assumed he would go undrafted just because he doesn't really have a game yet. He's a really athletic kid, a lot of promise. And another year at school would have really helped him. But yeah, he got a tryout with the Grizzlies, you said, right? So hopefully he can put it together, have a year or two in the D League, and maybe he can come up eventually.
Definitely agree with that. My losers quickly were the Bulls, not because of just the trade. I think that definitely hurts. You give up a player of Jimmy Butler's caliber, you're never going to, I mean, we say this all the time. When you trade a superstar, you're never going to get his true value back. They get Chris Dunn, who I still believe in, a second-year player who was drafted by the Timberwolves last year, who was really a point guard with a lot of potential coming into the league. You know, Thibodeau likes to use his guards, well, really all his players, high minutes. So Chris Dunn probably didn't get the developmental minutes that he should have gotten in his rookie year because Ricky Rubio is playing 30, 35 minutes a game. But, the Bulls do get Levine, they do get Dunn, and they get Lauri Markkanen. But I just think that it clearly signals a rebuild. Dwayne Wade's definitely not going to be happy. I don't know. I know he committed to opting into his contract. I don't know if he's technically or legally done that yet. But it's probably not going to be a very good year for Chicago. They're going to have a lot of young players, and it'll probably be a lot of losing. So they were one of my losers from last night. What did you think about the Bulls?
Yeah, it's hard to come out a winner when your best player's gone. I don't think they did too bad in the return. Levine's a good player. It is troubling that he's coming off an injury, especially one of that caliber in the knee. If he has any setbacks, especially with Chicago's past of point guards with knee injuries, that could be unfortunate for them, especially as the centerpiece of this deal. Chris Dunn, yeah, like you said, still a lot of potential there. Can't give up on the guy after 1 year. He didn't really have a chance to develop. I think he should still become a good NBA player. The value for Markkanen, it was a little bit of a reach. But he was the best big man on the board. And if you trade your superstar player for 2 guards, then it would make sense to go either wing or big, and he was the best player available in those areas. So I can't knock him, but yeah, it's hard to come out a winner when you trade Jimmy Butler.
Yeah, no doubt about that. My second loser from last night was the Oklahoma City Thunder. They got Terrence Ferguson, who is a good shooter. He's definitely raw. Was an Arizona commit. Played in Australia this past year. 6'7", 190, 195. Long, versatile, athletic, words that we're used to hearing with the Thunder, from Kevin Durant to Thabo Sefolosha to Andre Robertson to Jeremy Grant. They just love long players. But the reason they're a loser for me is they didn't address their biggest needs, and they probably had the ability to do so. Their biggest need clearly is that backup point guard. They fall off a cliff when Russell Westbrook goes to the bench, evidenced by the first-round series against the Houston Rockets, where they were minus 58 in the minutes that he was off the floor when he was barely off the floor, and plus 15 with him on the floor. Norris Cole was a train wreck. Samaje Christian couldn't get the job done. Cameron Payne, they gave him 2 years and then cut bait with him and sent him to Chicago. So I really expected them to go after a backup point guard. I thought Frank Jackson was probably the best fit in that range. I also thought they could have moved back, garnered a second-round pick from Orlando, who was looking to move off picks, which I reported before the draft. There was no way they were going to take 4 players in last night's draft, and they did end up moving, I think, 2 of those picks. So I thought that the Thunder, I thought Sam Presti had an opportunity to either get Ferguson and another guy, or at least just move back, get a backup point guard, such as Jackson or Jawan Evans, who was still there until mid to late second round. And then they would have had an additional second-round pick to maybe address getting a long, athletic wing. Like there was a couple guys that were still there in the second round. Jerron Blossom Game from Clemson was one. The Spurs got him. Seems like they always get a steal and then turn him into a diamond in the rough. So I just thought the Thunder, we'll see. The verdict is still out on Terrence Ferguson, but I just didn't think they did enough to try to address what they do truly need. What did you think about them not making any moves and just staying put at 21 and taking Ferguson?
I actually really like that pick. Though backup point guard is their biggest need, like you touched on, I think that's something that they need to address immediately, and taking a guy in that range wasn't really going to fix that for next year. I think the way to go is to try and get a playmaker in free agency, someone who can come in and contribute immediately, rather than trying to rely on a rookie to come in and play those valuable minutes when Russ is off the bench, or when Russ is on the bench, rather. And Ferguson kind of gives them what exactly they need. I thought going into the draft they needed to get a shooter, and that is exactly what Terrence Ferguson is. Surrounding Westbrook with as many shooters as possible should be the formula to this team's success. And they didn't really have that in the backcourt and on the wing with Westbrook last year. So getting a guy like Ferguson to be an ultimate 3-and-D player, I thought that was a good pick.
There's no question about that. You make some very valid points. Definitely, the process should be getting as many floor spacers and shooters as you can around Westbrook. And their secondary need was definitely a small forward. They moved Andre Robertson to the small forward position last year when they acquired Victor Oladipo, but he's not really an offensive threat, and you sort of need that guy on the wing who can be a 3-and-D player. Robertson's definitely got the defensive part locked down, but he just has shown no real improvement on the offensive end. So I can definitely understand what you're saying, that Terrence Ferguson has the potential to fill that need, and they can possibly address backup point guard in free agency. So that's the glass half full approach for Thunder fans out there. And then lastly, we talked about them earlier when we were talking about the Kings winning. I wasn't really a fan of what the Blazers did last night. The Blazers are a team that are cash strapped. They have the 3rd highest payroll in the league. They really can't do much in terms of just going and signing a free agent outright. They would have to work out a sign and trade or something. But I like Zach Collins. I really do. He's got a ton of potential. I liked him at Gonzaga. He didn't play huge minutes because of Shemek Karnowski in the middle. But he's definitely got potential. He's potentially a stretch 5. Reports are that he's just continuing to work on his perimeter game and his three-point shot. So this is not a referendum on Zach Collins. I just think that trading your 15th and your 20th pick, which turned out to be Harry Giles and Justin Jackson, who, if all goes well, could both be better than Collins, I don't think was very good value, and I don't think it was a great approach, considering you need young assets who will play on rookie contracts because you are a cash-strapped organization.
Yeah, and with so many centers in the same tier in this class, especially right around that mid-first round where they had 3 picks, if they had just stayed, they could have got a guy who's maybe not as NBA ready as Collins because his game translates really well starting already. But they have Nurkic, so it's not like that's an immediate need. They could have got a guy like either Harry Giles, Jared Allen. Looks like John Collins is still right around there. I thought those would have all been great fits, and they could have got 2 of those guys, or a big and a wing. And I agree. I didn't like the move. They really wanted to trade one of those picks. They didn't want to take all 3 first-rounders. But I thought they could have got either a better deal or I thought they could have came away with better without moving the pick.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like I said, Zach Collins could very well pan out, but for the reasons you mentioned, it just didn't seem to make a lot of sense. The other Collins, John Collins, who ended up going to the Hawks, probably could have filled the same need. Like you said, they don't need a stud. They have a young center in Yusuf Nurkic there who should be there as long as he wants to be there, because they will throw money at him when free agency approaches. But yeah, I just think with that not being a pressing need, they could have come away with more, and they need players who will play on cheap rookie deals. So they were sort of the third loser for me. Moving on though, let's talk about, did you have a non-lottery player or a couple non-lottery players who people should watch out for, who really could become stars? They always happen in this league, and really in basketball and in football, where you can get a guy who wasn't the most touted guy coming in, but ends up being, when you look back, one of the solid mainstays from the draft.
That guy for me is Frank Jackson, mostly because of the fit. I liked his game. I liked what I saw from him at Duke. I thought if he stayed, he could have possibly become a lottery pick next year. So he has lottery talent. But yeah, most importantly is the fit. New Orleans made a great move. They swapped the 41st pick, I believe, to move up to 31. Or no, it was the 40th pick. They swapped to Charlotte. And they traded basically Dwayne Bacon for Frank Jackson. So it's an upgrade to Frank Jackson. He steps into a role immediately where he can contribute important minutes. Pelicans really need to surround Davis and Cousins with shooters and playmakers at the guard. And Frank Jackson offers exactly that. And I thought that was one of the better picks of the night. Also, I had Giles, who we touched upon. He could still, if healthy, can become the great player that he was once projected to be, and reports during the pre-draft process indicated that his knee was healthy, or at least healthier. And then lastly, Derek White. Like we're saying, the Spurs always find a value with their pick and with their player development. They can kind of make him even better than what he was projected to be. And Derek White was a guy that was rising. His stock was really up. He can offer a lot of things. He's a combo guard who can shoot. He's athletic. He has a good finishing ability. And he was an above-average defender. And putting that into that system, who knows what he could become, but it was a good pick there too.
Yeah, those are all great calls. I'm going to go second round to a couple guys. You just hit on some of the non-lottery players in the first round. They were back-to-back picks, 2 of my favorite guys who could be in the league for a while. At 37, Semi Ojeleye got drafted to Boston. Now, let me quickly, before I get into this, let me make sure that did he get moved, do you know? Or is he...
Nope, he's staying in Boston now.
Okay, good. So, yeah, what I was going to say about Semi Ojeleye, good player, very, very, very high upside. Started his career at Duke, so that should tell you, what he was thought of as a young player. Finished up at SMU, averaged about 19 points per game. Inside, outside threat. He's sort of undersized if you really want him to go bang with bigs, but he's a true small forward. And the reason I like him is because if Boston's going to do anything in terms of landing a star or getting Hayward or still trying to work on this Porzingis thing, they're going to have to probably move Jay Crowder. And Semi Ojeleye is a very similar type of player, but I would go as far as to say that he's got a higher ceiling than someone like Jay Crowder. I mean, he's definitely more gifted on the offensive end. He's probably not quite the defender, but he's such a versatile guy, and Boston is sort of has sort of built their roster on versatility, whether it be Avery Bradley, Al Horford, guys that can, Jaylen Brown, guys that can play, multiple positions, defend multiple positions, can be perimeter threats, can get, their work done inside and outside. So I think that Semi Ojeleye could be, a player that we don't hear a lot about, but 7, 8, 9 years down the road, he's still in the league, and he's a productive player for the Celtics or wherever else he may end up. And then one pick after that, we already touched on this, but Jordan Bell, I expect him to be in the league for a long time just because he's another guy who's going to come in and do what's asked of him. He's not going to try to get outside of his game. He's going to fill a specific need and a specific role for a team who he's a perfect fit for in the Golden State Warriors. So we already talked about him enough, but those were two of my guys from the second round who I could see being in the league, 5, 7, 10 years from now. And we look back on this draft class like, wow, look how many guys who aren't in the league went before Ojeleye and Jordan Bell.
Yeah, you hit it on the head with Ojeleye. He was a first-round talent, and I was surprised he fell past that. And he fell to the Celtics, which is probably why I didn't have him on my board for this, but the Celtics are so heavy at the forward, and they take Tatum, they have Brown, they're going to target Gordon Hayward. If Crowder still, I believe he'll be moved this offseason, but yeah, it'll be tough to crack the rotation immediately, but he's definitely a first-round talent, a great value there. And if he can find a role, then yeah, watch out. He could be in the league for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely agree with that. So that sort of wraps up our draft recap. Quickly before we go, we just wanted to talk a little bit about free agency. And, my question to you, John, is for teams that didn't do as well as you hoped for or still have needs according to you and sort of your draft outlook, what are some things that you think people should look for in free agency?
Well, first domino, Paul George. There's almost a 0% chance that he stays as a Pacer just because he's been so adamant about leaving, and it would be foolish not to trade him now. The options, I'm still assuming that Cavaliers will try and make a last-minute play. Celtics will be in the mix, the Lakers. But all of this could kind of change how the free agency landscape shifts a little bit. I'm interested to see what you have on the Paul George situation and where you think he'll end up.
I think, and it's funny because you didn't say it, but from what I'm hearing and sort of the CBA sort of angle of all this, do not be one bit shocked if Paul George is a San Antonio Spur next year. And it's for multiple reasons. One, who doesn't want to go play in that organization for one of the best coaches of all time? But two, if you look at really what's happening and who teams are fielding calls about and what sort of things that San Antonio is doing to sort of finagle their way through the salary cap, that's my biggest indication right now. We're hearing that LaMarcus Aldridge and Danny Green are being shopped, and they have big salary numbers. So that's sort of the first thing you got to do because San Antonio's over the cap as it stands, so they're going to have to clear some cap room. So if they can move off the contracts of Aldridge and Danny Green as well as Pau Gasol agreeing to restructure his contract and play next year with the Spurs for less, I think these moves aren't being done in vain. I think the Spurs know what they're doing, and I think they have a plan. I think initially I do believe that they were going after Chris Paul. I sort of have moved off of that right now. And I think all this sort of cap positioning and trade shopping is possibly to position themselves for a run at Paul George.
Yeah, it's an interesting take. I haven't heard too much about that. That'd definitely be a good fit for them. And they seem adamant on moving LaMarcus, so that would make sense. It would just be interesting to see if they could get him to stay. I know that the Spurs would be a really attractive place to stay. But is it a risk? So, not necessarily for the Spurs, but for these other teams to take a flyer and really give anything of value to the Pacers for Paul George, knowing that his heart may indeed lie in LA.
Yeah, I've been asked that so many times now, and it's such a valid point. You can't really give up a ton or make a ton of roster moves to get a guy that might not even want to be there. But I think a team like the Spurs and the Cavs are two teams with enough clout and have sort of enough of a draw that it's worth the risk. I mean, the Cavs really have nothing to lose because as it stands right now, they're not getting past the Warriors anytime soon with their current roster. But LeBron James is such a big draw, and knowing how easy the game would be for Paul George in Cleveland, I think that he would have to entertain the idea of staying. And then same thing in San Antonio. That system, that organization, and that Hall of Fame coach are such a big draw. I don't see how you could turn a blind eye to playing in San Antonio. The defensive versatility would just be something tremendous to watch. I mean, they would have two of the best perimeter defenders on the same team. Paul George would probably slot in as playing the 2, or Kawhi and PG would be interchangeable at the 2 and the 3. Pop doesn't really like to go small, and so I think you would just see either Parker, or if he does retire and they get a new point guard, the point guard position will be fine. You'll have Paul George and Kawhi Leonard on the wings, and then Pau Gasol will probably still be manning the middle. And to get Paul George, you'd have to move off the contract of LaMarcus Aldridge. So they'd probably just plug in a guy like Davis Bertans, who the Spurs really like. He's very, very versatile. He can step out and shoot threes. He's more of a perimeter-oriented player, which is perfect for a 4-man in today's NBA. So I definitely say watch out for the Spurs in the pursuit of Paul George. What else did you sort of I know you said that's the main domino to fall. Do you have any other thoughts or sort of ideas, or are you intrigued by anything else in free agency?
Well, first thing, it was kind of one of Kyle Lowry's main options, if it's true that he does not intend to return to Toronto, would have seemed to be Philly. But after they made the move to move up and get Markelle Fultz, it seems that is not any longer an option. So it'll be interesting to see where he could go. I know the Pelicans could be one place. I know you're not a big Lowry guy, but where do you think you could see him end up?
Yeah, it's interesting because the market I don't think is going to be very robust for him because he's already sort of an older player. He's not old, but he's an older player. So his best days aren't necessarily in front of him, and you're going to have to commit a lot of money to getting him. So I don't see the market as very robust. A couple options I will tell you is I think if the Paul Griffin duo leaves the Clippers, I can see them just trying to remain relevant, throwing a contract offer at Lowry. I've heard some people say maybe he's a natural replacement for Rubio in Minnesota because all reports are that Minnesota's trying to move Rubio. I disagree with that notion heavily. Kyle Lowry is not a guy that's going to go in there and make Jang, Towns, Butler, Wiggins better. He's going to go in there with the scorer's mentality, and you can't have.
Especially with.
Go ahead.
Yeah, especially with Butler there now, it's
Yeah,
not an ideal fit whatsoever.
Yeah, you can't have four guys who just want to score the ball. So I sort of nixed that idea. I don't think he's gonna want to be back in Toronto, but don't be surprised with just sort of the way things are going, if because of the money situation and him finding out that the market for him isn't as robust as he thought, if he does end up back in Toronto.
Yep, completely agree.
Other than that, I think we'll wrap it up. There's just so many, like you said, there's just so many dominoes to fall. We can't really get too heavily into free agency, but hopefully for the listeners out there, you can expect something from us either before July 1st or, during the middle of all the free agency mayhem. Look for RotoDen to put something out there in terms of another podcast. But do you have any final thoughts on anything we covered today, or want to mention anything else, John?
No, I think we touched on most.
All right, guys. Well, that'll do it for us, and we'll see you next time on a RotoDen podcast.